In part 1, we showed you how to hook up a tiny house to a truck. In part 2, we're going to show you what it takes to drive it. Before you hit the road, it's really important to do a safety check, so we're going to go ahead and do that. I can't stress this enough how important it is to make sure all of these connections are secure before you leave again with your tiny house. Some of those connections are making sure that the hitch and hitch lock are connected correctly, that the trailer is actually seated on the ball, and that it is locked securely with either a pin or a lock on the trailer. You also want to make sure all of the chains are connected correctly, that your breakaway system is connected right and free to pull out that pin if need be. Also, you want to make sure that the 7-pin connector is connected and that you're getting a reading on the front on the brake controller that it says it is connected, and make sure you see numbers. If that's not connected, you need to figure out exactly what the problem is so you can get going. And make sure to check all of your brake lights, make sure all of your lights are working on the trailer, and then you're ready to go. So before you leave, you always want to make sure that your mirrors are all set up and right where you want them. I like to adjust my mirrors so I can see the wheels on the trailer behind me as we're driving. And you absolutely want to make sure about your brake controller. Make sure that it is connected, that it's giving you the right prompt, and that everything works before you leave. We're doing all this so you can keep yourself, your tiny house, and all of the people on the road safe. Let's hit the road. All right. And now we're driving the tiny house. For the past 2 years, Alexis and I have traveled about 40,000 miles across the country. So we know a thing or two about towing a tiny house. It's all about taking your time and being safe. Believe it or not, we can actually drive the speed limit. Though I really like to keep it between 55 and 65, and that also depends on what state we're in. Because in states like California, if you're pulling a trailer, you're not supposed to drive over 55. So one of the things you have to do is share the road with semis, and this is a weird thing that happens. When a semi passes you, you have this vacuum effect that happens in between the trucks. So you get pulled towards the semi and then pushed away. So you really have to pay attention and steer as straight as possible while this is happening. Also with active driving, it's all about keeping it in between the lines. So using my mirrors on both sides, and as you can see, my hands go back and forth quite a bit, and that's just to keep the truck and the trailer straight. So there's another big thing that you have to deal with is weather. Today's actually a little breezy, so it adds a little bit more complexity to driving. It's not super windy, so we decided to go ahead and drive. But I do recommend if it's too windy, you don't feel confident enough, pull over. You got a house with you, you can spend the night in it. One of the things you're going to encounter while driving are grades. So a grade is the percentage of steepness up or down a hill. The steepest grade that we encountered was in Flagstaff, Arizona. It was a 9% grade. As we went down the hill, we used the tow feature on the U-Haul. What that does is it drops a gear from your regular drive gear. It drops into a lower gear and makes it so you don't have to use the brakes as much while you're traveling downhill, which is important because if your brakes heat up, they get to a point where they won't work anymore. I use the tow feature all the time. Whether I'm coming to a stoplight or getting off the highway, it helps to slow us down. So another thing you have to worry about is other cars. There's a lot of really excited people out there that when they see a tiny house, they want to take a picture, they want to wave at the driver, which is all and good, but you do have to pay attention because they might not be. So keep an eye out for all of the drivers around you. So another thing is changing lanes. You really have to be aware of everything around you when you change lanes. And it's all about going slow, making that transition slowly. If you jerk the wheel, you are going to flip the truck, the house, hurt yourself and everyone around you. So that's the one thing you do not want to do. Every transition is really, really slow. Just like semi-trucks, a tiny house is very, very tall. You really have to pay attention to your overhead clearance. Always looking for the heights of bridges, especially when you get off the highway. In most states, bridges under 16 feet are marked. When you get off the highway, you're probably going to encounter some unmarked bridges. So if you do and have the ability, just turn and go another way. If you don't, then when you pull up to it, get your passenger to jump out and eyeball to make sure you can get underneath it. Don't worry about the people behind you. That tiny house you're pulling is more important. So at some point you're going to have to get gas while you're driving your tiny house. So if you do, make sure you take good and wide turns. When you're pulling up to a pump like this, there's always an overhang. So make sure the overhang is tall enough for you to get under to get the tiny house underneath. And again, if you're unsure, if it doesn't look high enough or doesn't have a number, get your partner to jump out and eyeball it for you. You always want to do nice wide turns because you don't want to tweak the wheels on the trailer or bump into anything. Now when getting on the highway, which is what we're about to do, you're definitely going to go slower than a lot of other cars, so be really careful. Use your mirrors, use your signal, and a lot of times the truckers will get over. So just play it safe, take your time. So traffic's your friend. There's no need to rush anywhere when you're pulling a tiny house. So sit back, relax, and let's do a podcast. Alexis and I don't travel if it's raining or snowing. And that's just because we're already doing something that's kind of hard and takes a lot of concentration. So adding another element like rain or snow to the whole thing makes it so much harder. I always advise to not drive the rain, especially the snow. There's no need to rush. Rushing leads to reckless driving. All this information we're sharing with you is based on our 2 years of experience towing our tiny house. Make sure you do more research and practice towing your tiny house in a safe space. If you're thinking about moving your tiny house once or taking it on a road trip, these tips will help keep you and your tiny house safe. Be safe, look good, have fun out there. Oh, and get out of my yard.
Alexis and Christian here of Tiny House Expedition.
Click on the left or right to see more tiny house tours and stories.
And don't forget to click on our faces to subscribe today.